My name is Caleb Marin, and I'm 45 years old. 3 months ago, I was worth nearly $7 million. I ran a thriving plumbing supply company, lived in a 6-bedroom colonial on a hill, and had 2 kids in college. Now, I'm about to tell you how losing everything tore me apart and somehow rebuilt me into someone I barely recognize. When my ex-wife Elena and her slick lawyer boyfriend Grayson Vale gutted my life and walked away laughing, I thought that was it for me. There's no manual for the day your world ends, just silence and the sound of your own heartbeat reminding you you're still alive when you wish you weren't. "Cal, you're pathetic," Elena said in the courthouse hallway, Grayson's arm hooked around her waist like a trophy. 20 years of marriage and you never saw this coming. Some businessman you turned out to be. Grayson smirked, straightening his designer tie. "Nothing personal, Caleb? Well, actually, maybe it is." Their laughter echoed off the marble walls, cold and hollow. I stood there in my only remaining suit, watching them walk away with everything I'd built. The business I started from nothing. The house where my children took their first steps. The savings account that once held $6.7 million. Even custody of my twins, Liam and Isla. "Go ahead, sue me," she called over her shoulder. "Oh wait, you can't afford a lawyer anymore." Then, smiling that venomous smile, she added, "Grayson made sure of that." 3 months later, I was living in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and lost hope, down to my last $1,000. That's when I remembered an old savings account my grandfather Arthur Marin had opened when I was born. It was supposed to have $50 in it, maybe enough for a decent meal before the lights went out for good. But when the teller looked up my name, her face went pale. She whispered something to her manager, who came over, peered at the screen, and froze like he'd seen a ghost. "Mr. Marin, this account, it's been compounding interest since 1960. He turned the screen toward me. What I saw made my knees buckle. The woman who'd thought she'd destroyed me. The man who thought he'd won. They had no idea what was coming. Because my grandfather, a quiet factory worker who never made more than 15 grand a year, had just reached out from beyond the grave to pull me out of the ashes. This is that story, and you'll want to hear every word. But first, you need to know who I was before everything collapsed, because only then can you understand how far I fell and how blind I was to the rot growing under my own roof. Marin Plumbing Supplies started in a rented garage in Queens back in 2004. I was 25, armed with a business degree, a pregnant wife, and the $12,000 my father, Gerald, had left me when he passed. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., I'd kiss Elena's growing belly and drive to that cold garage, sorting through boxes until the first customers arrived. Contractors learned they could rely on me. Fair prices, no excuses, always stocked. "You're going to work yourself into an early grave," Elena used to say, rubbing my shoulders as I hunched over the books at our kitchen table. "The babies need a father, not just a paycheck." The babies, Liam and Isla, came during a November snowstorm. I remember holding them for the first time, tiny and perfect, promising I'd give them everything I never had. My childhood hadn't been poor, but it had always teetered on the edge. My grandfather Arthur spent 40 years at the Chrysler plant. My father worked maintenance at a hospital. Honest men, hard lives. By the time my twins turned 10, Marin Plumbing had grown into a 15,000 square foot warehouse with 32 employees, including my brother Jonas, who ran the delivery fleet, and my cousin Derek, who managed commercial accounts. Every Thursday morning, I'd meet Walter Hennigan at Murphy's Diner on Forum Road. "Cal, you've built something real here," Walter would say, sliding the quarterly reports between our coffee cups. "Don't take it for granted." If only I'd listened.
Most businesses die young, 5 years, maybe less. Mine had survived 16 and was still growing 20% a year. The numbers were more than good. They were the kind of numbers that made banks smile and competitors grind their teeth. We just landed a contract with Brennan Construction Group, the biggest commercial builder in the tri-state area. That single account alone brought in $2 million a year. Add the retail side and other commercial clients, and Marin Plumbing was pulling close to $8 million annually in revenue. After expenses and cautious investments, my savings had climbed to that beautiful round number $6.7 million. Our home in Westchester was exactly what Elena used to dream about back when we were broke newlyweds. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a pool that shimmered like a promise, and a kitchen she'd redesigned 3 times just because she'd quit her job as a dental hygienist once Liam and Isla started school, devoting herself to what she liked to call managing our social presence. The country club isn't about golf, Cal, she'd tell me, twirling a glass of Chardonnay under the chandelier. It's where deals are made, where the right connections happen. She wasn't wrong. A few contracts had come through people I'd met at those club events, but I never had time to attend them myself. Elena was the one who made appearances. She'd go to ladies' luncheons, charity galas, wine tastings. She'd come home talking about who wore what, who was buying a villa in Tuscany, who just bought another vacation home in the Keys. That's when the name Grayson Vale started showing up in her stories about 2 years before everything blew up. His firm handles all the big money divorces, she said once, sliding her heels off after another fundraiser. Made partner at 35. Can you imagine? No, I couldn't. I was too busy actually working. My days started at 5 in the morning and ended after dark. Saturdays were paperwork. Sundays were supposed to be family days, but more often than not, I get a call, a burst pipe on a site, a missing shipment, a contractor screaming deadlines. Always something. Liam was at Boston College studying business, trying to follow my footsteps. Isla was at NYU for marketing. Their combined tuition was $140,000 a year. They were good kids, smart, driven. They'd text me now and then, usually about money, sometimes just a quick hi. Elena handled most of the parenting, the calls about grades, relationships, and weekend plans. Dad's always working. I once overheard Isla say on speakerphone, Mom says he loves that warehouse more than us. It stung like hell, but I told myself it was worth it, that every 16-hour day, every missed recital, every canceled vacation was an investment in their future. The business would be theirs someday. The money would make sure they never had to scrape and worry the way I had. My father, Gerald, had been gone 5 years by then, but sometimes I could still hear his voice, low and steady. Nobody lies on their deathbed wishing they'd spent more time at work, son. I pushed that voice aside, same way I ignored the growing chill in Elena's eyes. The wine bottles piling up, the nights she stayed out with friends, the way our bedroom started feeling like a hotel room she barely checked into. I thought we were building an empire together. I didn't realize she was already laying the dynamite. Tuesday, March 14th. That date is burned into me, like a scar that will never fade. I left the warehouse early for once 3 in the afternoon. It was our 22nd wedding anniversary. I had 24 roses on the passenger seat and a reservation at Chez Laurent, the same French place where I'd proposed all those years ago. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I saw was Grayson Vale's black BMW parked where my truck usually Saturday. I knew that car Elena had pointed it out at the country club 2 months earlier, bragging about its custom leather interior and obscene price tag. The second thing I noticed were the bedroom curtains, drawn tight even though it was the middle of the day. I stood in the foyer for a full minute, roses in my hand, listening. The sounds came from upstairs, my bedroom, my bed. Laughter. Not nervous laughter, not shameful laughter, but the kind that comes from comfort, from routine. The kind you share with someone you've known intimately for a long, long time. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. Instead, I went back to my truck and sat there in silence for 3 hours. I watched as Grayson finally came out at 6:30, kissed my wife goodbye at the door like he owned the place, and drove away in that polished BMW. Elena stood there, waving after him, wrapped in the silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas. When I finally went inside at 8, she was showered, humming softly as she cooked dinner. "You're late," she said, not even glancing up. Anniversary or not, you could have called. The divorce papers came the next morning at 9:15 a.m. I was in the middle of a staff meeting when the process server walked into our conference room, 32 employees staring as he asked, Caleb Merrin? Yes, you've been served. My brother Jonas stood up like he was ready to throw the guy out, but I waved him off. My hands were steady, almost too steady. As I opened the envelope, it wasn't just a divorce. Elena was accusing me of abandonment, emotional abuse, financial manipulation, hidden assets, and even infidelity. Every single word was a lie, but that didn't matter. Grayson had built a legal masterpiece designed to burn me alive. The first meeting with the lawyers was held in Grayson's office, a power move to remind me whose arena I'd stepped into. Elena sat beside him in a new designer suit, diamond earrings I'd never seen before flashing in the light. She wouldn't even look at me. My client has been suffering in silence for years, Grayson began smoothly, resting his hand on her arm. Your workaholism, your emotional absence, your prioritization of money over family. We have documentation 5 years worth. What documentation? My lawyer, Paul Redfield, asked. Grayson opened a box of files like a magician unveiling a trick. Journals supposedly Elena's filled with entries describing my neglect, photos of me at work during birthdays and family gatherings, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, even affidavits from country club members claiming they'd seen me being controlling, verbally abusive. This is fiction, I said, my voice breaking. Elena, tell them this is a lie. For the first time, she looked at me. Her eyes were like winter, clear, cold, and merciless. The only lie, she said softly, was pretending our marriage meant anything to you. Grayson helped me see that. The forensic accountant they brought in turned out to be Grayson's cousin, though we didn't learn that until much later. He testified that I'd been hiding assets, shifting money offshore, and undervaluing my company. Every denial cost me more in legal fees. Every document I had to produce bled more time, more dignity. Paul was a good man, but outgunned, overwhelmed, and maybe even a little afraid of Grayson's reputation. Cal, he said during a break, voice tight, they're requesting full custody of the twins. Even though they're 19, it still affects support. They're adults, I snapped. How can she get custody of adults? Legal adults, yes, but still financially dependent in college. Grayson knows every loophole, and he hesitated. He golfs with Judge Brennan. Judge Martin Brennan. I'd voted for the man his whole campaign built on fairness and family values. But sitting in that courtroom, watching him nod along to every word Grayson said while brushing off Paul's objections, I realized justice was just another business transaction. Elena cried on cue as she described how I'd controlled her, isolated her, made her feel worthless. Each word crafted for maximum damage, every tear perfectly timed. And I sat there, staring at the woman I'd once loved more than my own life, wondering when exactly she'd stopped being my wife and started being my enemy. The woman who'd spent $40,000 remodeling our kitchen claimed I'd kept her prisoner in a loveless marriage. Then came the letters, Liam and Isla, my own children, saying I'd been absent, obsessed with work, never there when it mattered. Reading their words felt like knives sliding between my ribs, each sentence twisting deeper. The final hearing lasted 6 hours. 6 hours to dismantle 22 years of my life. Grayson painted me as a monster, a greedy, heartless man who'd hidden millions and emotionally terrorized his family, and Judge Brennan's ruling came down like a hammer. Elena got the house, the business, the savings, and full custody with a maximum support based on my old income. I walked out of that courtroom with nothing but the clothes on my back and a 20-year-old Honda Civic I'd kept for sentimental reasons. This is justice, Grayson said loud enough for everyone to hear as we stepped into the hallway. Then he leaned in closer, voice slick and poisonous. She tastes amazing, by the way. The studio apartment on Belmont Avenue cost $800 a month and came with a view of a brick wall and the constant smell of curry from the Indian restaurant downstairs. After 3 months, I'd memorized every stain on the ceiling, every crack in the plaster, every hour the upstairs baby cried. My meals were instant ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever the dollar store had on sale. But the worst part wasn't hunger or poverty. It was invisibility. Former employees crossed the street when they saw me. Guys from the country club looked through me like I was a ghost. Even Jonas, my brother, had to keep his distance. Elena had kept him on at the company, and he needed that job to feed his kids. I'm sorry, Cal, he whispered during our one secret meeting at a highway rest stop. She watches everything. Grayson's got her convinced you're plotting something. If she finds out I talked to you, I'm done. My bank account showed $1,043. The court had garnished my wages from the temporary warehouse job I'd found 70% taken for alimony and back support. Judge Brennan had based the payments on what I used to make, not what I did now. Paul tried to file for modification, but that required another retainer I didn't have. Liam still wouldn't speak to me. Isla picked up once, crying, saying her mother had shown her proof of my affairs, fake bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, forged statements, digital ghosts Grayson had made real enough to destroy me. The isolation was complete. At 45, I was more alone than I'd ever been at 25. Only now, I didn't have youth or hope on my side. It was a Thursday evening when I started sorting through my storage unit, the one Elena never knew about. I'd rented it years ago in my father's name to hold his old belongings. Most of it was junk-rusted tools, photo albums, his collection of baseball cards that turned out to be worthless. But buried in a shoebox marked important papers, I found something that stopped me cold. A savings passbook from First National Trust dated January 15th, 1960. The name on the account, Caleb Arthur Merrin. Opening deposit, $50. Clipped to it was a note written in my grandfather's careful hand. For my grandson's future, do not touch except in dire need. Arthur Merrin. I remembered this story faintly, how my grandfather had opened an account the day I was born, his first grandchild. $50 had been a week's wages for him back then. My father, Gerald, had mentioned it once or twice over the years, but we'd all assumed the account was lost to one of the many bank mergers over time. First National Trust had become Commerce Bank, then Republic Federal, then finally Chase. The passbook was probably worthless, a relic from another life, but sitting there on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by my father's ghosts, I felt a strange pull to see it through. My grandfather had been a simple man, a factory worker at Chrysler for 40 years. He died when I was 10, but I still remembered his hands. Scarred, strong, always smelling faintly of oil and metal. He'd slip me $1 when my parents weren't looking and say, "Save half, spend half. Time makes money grow, Caleb, don't forget that." The next morning I put on my last decent shirt, the one I kept for job interviews, and drove to the Chase branch that had once been First National Trust. The building was glass and steel now, modern and sterile. Nothing like the brick bank my grandfather would have known. The teller was a young woman named Patricia, bright smile, sharp eyes, polite voice. And she had no idea she was about to change my life. Patricia's voice was polite, the kind of smooth tone you learn from customer service videos. "How can I help you today, sir?" "I've got an old account," I said, sliding the brittle little passbook across the counter. The paper was yellowed and soft from age. The ink faded to the color of old bruises. Very old. 1960. "I'd like to close it out." She looked at me like I'd handed her a telegram from a ghost. Her nails clicked on the keyboard as she typed something in. Frown. More typing. Deeper frown. "Let me check our archive system," she said. She disappeared into a different screen, eyes darting, lips moving slightly as she read whatever was on there. The air conditioner hummed overhead. I could hear the clock tick. Then her posture shifted, shoulders straightened, breath caught, polite mask replaced by something closer to surprise. "Mr. Callan," she said, her voice thinner now. "Could you wait just a moment? I need to get my manager." Great, another dead end. They'd tell me the account had been closed in the 80s, or that it got lost during one of the mergers. That felt about right, my luck, in a nutshell. Patricia reappeared with a man in a gray suit that had seen better years. Late 50s, thinning hair, the weary professionalism of someone who spent half a lifetime pretending to care about other people's money. His name tag said H.L. Mercer, branch manager. "Mr. Callan," he said, measured and calm, like he was diffusing a bomb. "Would you mind stepping into my office for a moment? We should talk privately about this account." His hand was shaking, just slightly, as he held the passbook like he knew it was something more than old paper. I followed him past the counters and the security cameras, down the short hall lined with framed photos of smiling tellers and community donations. My heart was steady, but there was a kind of static in my head. Whatever this was, I could handle it. I'd already lost my home, my family, my name. But as Mercer closed the office door behind us, I saw his fingers tremble again when he set the passbook on the desk. Not from age, from nerves. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something unfamiliar a flicker of possibility. Mr. Mercer's office smelled like money and polished mahogany desk, leather chairs, and a wall full of framed certificates meant to impress anyone who still cared about that kind of thing. He motioned for me to sit, then laid the old passbook on the desk like it was radioactive. His fingers flew across the keyboard, the reflection of the monitor flashing green in his glasses. I couldn't see the screen, but I could see his face. Every few seconds, the calm banker mask cracked a little more. Confusion, then disbelief, then something close to awe. "Mr. Callan," he said finally, voice careful. He cleared his throat. "This account is extraordinary." He reached for a legal pad, scribbling numbers with the kind of focus that made the pen squeak against the paper. "Your grandfather didn't open a standard savings account. He opened something called a Century Growth Account, a short-lived investment product, First National Trust, launched in 1960. He clicked the calculator a few times, then looked up. It compounded at 7.5% annually, locked for a minimum of 45 years. The contract survived every merger, every rebrand, every acquisition. No one could touch it, not even you, until your 45th birthday. I turned 45 3 months ago," I said. My mouth was dry as dust. He nodded slowly. "Exactly. That's when it matured." He turned the monitor toward me. "Do you understand how compound interest works over time?" "In theory," I muttered. "This," he said, tapping the screen, "is not theory." I leaned forward, and for a moment I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I counted the digits, counted again. 484,7539.28. "That can't be right," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. "It was $50. $50, Mercer said, calm as a surgeon. "At 7.5% compound interest over 64 years. Your grandfather made the perfect choice at the perfect time." He showed me a spreadsheet, neat columns of dates and balances. By year 20, $212. By year 40, $895. By year 64, nearly 5 million. My hands were trembling. "This is mine?" He nodded. "Every cent, but there's more." He opened a drawer and pulled out a battered manila folder. Inside was another document, its edges brittle with age. "In 1965, your grandfather added an investment addendum. He instructed the bank to purchase $100 worth of stock in a company called Berkshire Hathaway." The room tilted. "5 shares," Mercer continued. "After splits and 60 years of growth, they're now worth about $8.2 million. I couldn't breathe. The air felt heavy, unreal. Mercer poured me a glass of water from a decanter that probably cost more than my car. I drank it all and didn't taste a thing. He reached into the folder again, pulling out an envelope yellowed with age. My name was written across it in looping, deliberate script. "Your grandfather left this to be delivered upon activation of the account." I opened it carefully, my fingers shaking. Inside was a letter, handwritten. The ink faded but still steady. "Dear Samuel, if you're reading this, it means you've reached the age of wisdom and found yourself in need. I know nothing of your future, only that life has storms, and every man deserves a harbor. I worked hard and saw little for it, but I learned 3 truths. Money is not wealth. Time is. What's hidden cannot be stolen. A man who seems to have nothing is often richer than one who shows everything." I met a young man named Warren, once sharp kid, talked sense about patience and value. "Maybe this investment will amount to nothing. Maybe everything. Use it wisely. Trust no one completely, not even those who share your bed. The world is full of Veronicas and Dennises, though they had other names in my day. E. Haw Callan. P.S. Never show all your cards, Sam, never." I looked up, my throat burned. "He knew," I said quietly. "Somehow he knew." Mercer nodded, sliding the folder back into the drawer. "There's one last detail. The account's contract states that if anyone tried to access it before your 45th birthday, all accrued interest and investments would be forfeited, gone, wiped out." It hit me all at once. The irony, the savage poetry of it. Renee and Dalton had torn my life apart, digging for everything they thought they could take. They'd found every cent I had except this. The one thing that could have saved me was the one thing they could never touch. "What do I do now?" I asked Mercer. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like a man examining a loaded weapon. "First," he said, "we'll set you up with our private wealth management division. Second, I recommend a few discreet tax attorneys and financial strategists. Third, he gave a small, knowing smile. You might consider keeping this quiet until you know exactly what you want to do. I thought of Renee's laughter echoing down the stairs that day, Dalton's smug grin across the courtroom, Judge Brennan's gavel coming down like a verdict from God. Oh, I said softly, I intend to be very quiet, Mr. Mercer. Very quiet indeed. When I stepped out of that bank, I was still the same man, same worn boots, same cheap jacket, but something inside had shifted. Not because of the money, but because I finally understood what my grandfather had tried to tell me. Real power is silent. It waits. It watches, then it strikes once, and only once, when the timing is perfect. For the next 2 weeks, I kept up the act. Same ramen dinners, same warehouse job, same cracked ceiling and curry smell from the restaurant below. But behind that disguise, Arthur Blackstone was the first person I told. Dennis's old mentor, sharp suit, sharper mind. Dennis was my protege, Arthur said, pouring bourbon into 2 crystal glasses. Brilliant. Soulless. I've been waiting years for him to overstep. He didn't have to wait long. Arthur's investigators unearthed everything, the kickbacks between Dalton and Judge Brennan, the fake accountant with forged credentials, the fabricated documents, the money trails. Renee's infidelity wasn't a rumor, it was a pattern. Dennis hadn't just been her lover, he'd been her partner in crime. We're not just undoing your divorce, Arthur told me. We're burning their little empire to the ground. And that's exactly what happened. The morning the FBI raided Dalton's firm, I was moving the last box out of that studio apartment. By noon, the news was everywhere. Prominent attorney and family court judge arrested in corruption probe. The same reporters who'd called me a disgraced businessman were now calling for Brennan's resignation. Renee called me that night, her voice sharp and panicked. What did you do, Sam? How is this happening? You had nothing. I had nothing you could see, I told her. My grandfather taught me that lesson. The divorce was overturned in full. Renee had to return the house, the company, and every dollar she hadn't already turned into jewelry and Botox. Dennis, desperate for a lighter sentence, gave the feds everything, the bribes, the forged evidence, even Renee's part in the setup. My kids came next. Mason and Sophie stood in my doorway one evening, both pale, both crying. Dad, we're sorry, Sophie whispered, shaking as she hugged me. She showed us proof, bank accounts, photos. It looked so real. You're my kids, I said. You were lied to. That's punishment enough. 6 months later, I sold Callan Industrial Supply to a construction firm eager to distance itself from the scandal. $12 million wired clean. Added to my grandfather's hidden fortune, I had more than I could ever spend, but I didn't care about that anymore. I bought a small house on the edge of town. Quiet street. No neighbors asking questions. Then I built something that mattered. The E.H. Callan Foundation Financial Literacy for Working Class Families. Every month I stand in front of a classroom of tired faces mechanics, single moms, warehouse clerks, and show them what time and patience can do. Compound interest, long-term growth. How to make the system work for them instead of against them. I tell them about my grandfather, the man who wore the same suit to church every Sunday, who saved $1 at a time and trusted time to multiply it. Time, I tell them, is the greatest asset you'll ever own. Not what you earn, what you keep growing. Tommy runs the day-to-day operations now. We've helped hundreds of families start savings accounts, teaching them the quiet kind of wealth, the kind that doesn't need to be flaunted. Renee works reception at a dental office these days, living with her sister in a rented duplex. Dalton's serving 3 years in federal prison. Judge Brennan got 5 and lost his pension. Sometimes justice does win. It just takes its time. On my desk, next to the passbook and the foundation's mission statement, sits a small black and white photo of my grandfather in his Sunday suit, smiling faintly like he knew how this story would end. The world worships what glitters, but he knew better. The real gold lies buried, waiting for the man patient enough to let it shine on its own time. When the young hotshots come through the foundation doors, slick suits, loud watches, talking about crypto and fast flips, I don't argue with them. I just point to the photo on my desk. That man, I tell them, turned $50 into 13 million. No scams, no shortcuts, just time used wisely. Some laugh, some listen. A few actually understand. because that's what my grandfather knew all along that time is the truest currency. That patience outlasts greed. That steady hands win games long after the loud ones burn out. Every night before I turn out the lights, I read his note again. Never let them see all your cards, Raymond. Never. He was right. The strongest move is the one no one sees coming until you lay your hand on the table and take everything back. If this story found you, remember this. Patience isn't weakness, it's precision. Sometimes the storm that breaks you is just clearing space for what's next. And when the dust finally settles, that's when the patient man rises.